Tonight, we are diving into a story that has exploded across social media, pulling the names Erika Kirk, Candace Owens, and Charlie Kirk into a whirlwind of speculation, accusations, and viral debate. Over the past few weeks, online posts, live stream clips, and anonymous threads have fueled claims linking these public figures to resurfaced conversations about Jeffrey Epstein and alleged recruitment networks. But what is actually verified, and what is simply internet rumor? In this video, we break down the timeline, examine the media narratives, analyze how digital amplification works, and separate documented facts from unproven allegations. We are not here to declare guilt, but to understand how stories spread, how reputations are shaped, and how audiences can think critically in a fast-moving information war. Stay with us, because the truth is often more complex than the headline suggests. And context matters more than viral outrage will. Online narratives demand scrutiny. To understand how this controversy began, we first need to look at how internet narratives typically form. In most modern media storms, the spark does not come from a courtroom or an official report. It usually starts with a clip, a post, or a comment taken from a longer discussion and shared without its full context. In this situation, online users began circulating claims that certain public figures were connected, directly or indirectly, known to discussions involving Jeffrey Epstein and alleged recruitment activity. It is critical to emphasize that, as of the time of this recording, many of these claims remain unverified and are heavily debated across platforms. The names Erika Kirk, Candace Owens, and Charlie Kirk began trending after commentary channels and independent bloggers amplified screenshots and short video excerpts. Some posts suggested that evidence had been leaked. Others framed the situation as a coordinated media cover-up. However, when examining the original sources, much of the material appears fragmented, edited, or lacking documented authentication. This is not unusual in digital controversies. The speed of sharing often outpaces the speed of verification. Candace Owens, known for her outspoken political commentary, has frequently addressed controversial subjects on her platforms. Because of her large following, any statement she makes can quickly become viral content. When clips circulate without full context, audiences may interpret them in dramatically different ways. Supporters may view them as investigative or courageous, while critics may frame them as inflammatory or misleading. That polarization fuels engagement, and engagement fuels algorithmic visibility. Charlie Kirk, another high-profile commentator, has also been pulled into online discussions, largely through association and speculation, rather than confirmed reporting. The internet often connects individuals through perceived ideological alignment, even when there is no documented operational link. This phenomenon, sometimes referred to as network association theory in digital sociology, describes how audiences mentally group public figures based on shared audiences or political branding. Once grouped, narratives about one person can spill over onto others. As for Erika Kirk, then much of the online conversation relies on claims made in threads that cite unnamed sources. Anonymous sourcing is not inherently false, but it does reduce verifiability. Traditional journalism requires corroboration, documentation, and on-the-record confirmation. Social media, by contrast, often treats repetition as validation. When enough accounts repeat the same allegation, it begins to feel established, even if no primary evidence has been independently confirmed. Another important factor in this developing narrative is the legacy of the Epstein case itself. Jeffrey Epstein's criminal history and the unresolved public questions surrounding his network have created a lasting atmosphere of suspicion. Because many people believe there are still undisclosed details about that case, any new rumor that references recruitment or hidden connections immediately captures attention. The emotional weight of the topic lowers the threshold for belief. Audiences may be more willing to assume wrongdoing because the broader scandal was real and deeply disturbing. However, critical thinking requires distinguishing between established historical facts and new claims that have not yet been proven. It is entirely possible for misinformation to attach itself to a real past event. In fact, controversial historical cases often become magnets for conspiracy narratives precisely because they contain elements of secrecy and institutional failure. That does not automatically invalidate every new claim, but it does mean each claim must be examined carefully and independently. Media narratives also evolve in stages. First comes speculation, then comes reaction. After that, commentary channels produce analysis videos, often with dramatic thumbnails and urgent language. Finally, mainstream outlets may report on the controversy, sometimes without confirming the underlying allegation itself. At that point, the story becomes self-sustaining. People are no longer debating the original evidence, they are debating reactions to reactions. In the case we are analyzing, much of the momentum appears driven by social media engagement loops. A claim is posted. Influencers respond. Their responses generate counter-responses. Screenshots of those responses circulate as new evidence. Each layer adds emotional intensity while sometimes moving further away from verifiable documentation. This does not mean the allegations are true or false. It means the structure of the internet rewards escalation over caution. It is also important to consider the incentives involved. Content creators benefit from high engagement. Outrage generates clicks. Suspicion generates watch time. Even debunking content can inadvertently amplify the original rumor by repeating it to new audiences. This creates what researchers call an amplification paradox. Attempts to clarify a claim may actually expand its reach. Another dimension worth examining is audience psychology. People tend to share information that aligns with their pre-existing beliefs. If someone already distrusts mainstream institutions, they may be more inclined to believe claims of hidden recruitment networks. Conversely, those who distrust independent commentators may dismiss the entire controversy as politically motivated. Confirmation bias operates on all sides. At this stage, what we can responsibly say is limited. There are circulating allegations. There are reactions from various commentators. There is significant online debate. What we do not yet have, at least in publicly verifiable form, is conclusive documented evidence that confirms the most dramatic versions of the claims. Responsible analysis requires acknowledging that gap. As this story continues to unfold, the most important question is not simply whether a particular allegation is true. The deeper question is how we, as digital citizens, socio-evaluate explosive claims in real time. Do we wait for documentation? Do we demand primary sources? Or do we rely on viral momentum as proof? In the next section, we will examine how specific clips and statements were interpreted, how editing and framing influence perception, and how quickly a narrative can transform from rumor to assumed reality in the modern media ecosystem. In the digital era, context is often the first casualty of virality. One of the central drivers behind the controversy involving Erika Kirk, Candace Owens, and Charlie Kirk appears to be the circulation of short video clips and screenshots presented as standalone proof. To understand how narratives accelerate online, we must examine how clip culture works and how framing can dramatically alter public perception. Short-form content thrives on emotional impact. Platforms reward material that generates immediate reactions: shock, anger, validation, or outrage. When a longer podcast, interview, or live stream is reduced to a 30-second excerpt, subtle qualifiers and nuanced explanations may disappear. Words like allegedly, if true, or reportedly can be trimmed out, leaving behind statements that appear definitive. The audience watching the clip may not realize what preceded or followed that segment. In this case, several posts circulating online claim to show leaked evidence being discussed or referenced. However, when tracing some of these clips back to their longer sources, the context appears more layered. In certain instances, commentators were referencing allegations made elsewhere rather than presenting independently verified documentation. But once clipped and shared without that clarification, the distinction between reporting on a claim and asserting a claim can blur. Framing plays a critical role here. A headline that reads, "Commentator discusses online allegations," carries a different weight than one that declares, "Evidence exposes recruitment network." Even if the underlying footage is identical, the language used in the caption guides interpretation. Studies in media psychology show that viewers often rely more on framing cues than on the detailed content itself. If a post announces that something is proof, many viewers will approach it assuming proof is present. Another important factor is visual editing. In zoom effects, dramatic music, highlighted subtitles, and selective pauses can all influence how a clip feels. A neutral statement can be made to seem ominous if paired with intense background music and bold red text. Conversely, serious allegations can be downplayed with calm presentation and dismissive tone. The presentation layer shapes emotional reception as much as the actual words spoken. In controversies tied to major historical scandals, such as the Epstein case, emotional charge is already high. Audiences bring pre-existing suspicions and unresolved anger into the viewing experience. This emotional context amplifies the persuasive power of clips. When someone sees a snippet suggesting a new connection, it may confirm their broader belief that hidden networks exist. Once confirmation bias activates, people are less likely to seek out the full recording. The speed of reposting further complicates verification. A clip can move from one platform to another in minutes. Each repost may slightly alter the framing. Captions change. Commentary layers are added. Reaction videos interpret the interpretation. By the time the clip reaches a large audience, it may be several steps removed from its origin. Tracking the original upload can become difficult, especially if the first account deletes or edits it. We must also consider the economic incentives of digital media. Site creators often compete for attention in crowded information spaces. A dramatic title can outperform a cautious one. For example, a video titled "Breaking Allegations Surface" may receive fewer clicks than one declaring, "Shocking evidence revealed." The pressure to stand out can unintentionally encourage stronger phrasing than the available documentation supports. At the same time, audiences themselves participate in amplification. Quote tweets, stitched reactions, and commentary threads keep the story alive. Many users share content not because they have verified it, but because they find it alarming or worth discussing. The line between analysis and amplification becomes thin. Even skeptics who attempt to debunk a claim may unintentionally introduce it to people who had never encountered it. In examining the material tied to this controversy, one recurring pattern is the reliance on screenshots that lack metadata. Without timestamps, original URLs, or verifiable sources, screenshots can be difficult to authenticate. Digital forensics experts emphasize the importance of traceable origin points. An image without source verification should be treated cautiously, regardless of how persuasive it appears. Another issue is the phenomenon of narrative stacking. This occurs when unrelated facts are placed side by side to imply a connection. For example, if two individuals have appeared at the same public event years apart, that fact alone does not establish collaboration. However, when presented alongside other suggestive information, audiences may infer coordination. The human brain is wired to detect patterns, even when those patterns are coincidental. It is equally important to recognize that not every viral claim is false. History shows that investigative breakthroughs sometimes begin with online tips. However, credible investigative journalism typically follows a structured process. Document review, multiple source corroboration, and legal vetting. When allegations circulate widely before such verification occurs, the public conversation can outrun the evidence. In this environment, responsible consumption of media requires active skepticism. Viewers should ask, where did this clip originate? Is the full version available? Has any reputable outlet independently verified the claim? Are primary documents accessible, or are we relying solely on commentary? For public figures, navigating this environment is complex. Responding too quickly can lend credibility to an unverified rumor. Ignoring it entirely may allow speculation to grow unchecked. Every strategic choice carries risk. Silence may be interpreted as guilt by some audiences, while denial may be framed as defensive by others. As we continue examining this unfolding story, the key takeaway from this section is not about declaring conclusions. It is about understanding mechanics. Clip culture, framing, editing, and algorithmic incentives combine to create powerful narrative engines. Once activated, they can transform ambiguous information into widely accepted belief within days. In Part 3, we will explore the role of mainstream media coverage, how institutional reporting differs from independent commentary, and how legitimacy is constructed, or contested, when online controversies spill into traditional news spaces. As online speculation intensified, another predictable phase of the modern controversy cycle began to unfold: the question of mainstream media involvement. In high-profile digital storms, audiences often look to established news organizations for confirmation or dismissal. When major outlets remain silent, some interpret that silence as caution. Others interpret it as suppression. This divergence reveals a deeper issue: the growing divide over who holds narrative authority. Traditional media institutions operate under legal and editorial standards that differ significantly from independent online commentators. Before publishing allegations involving identifiable individuals, established outlets typically require documented evidence, corroborating sources, and legal review. This process can take time. In contrast, social media platforms allow instantaneous publication without editorial gatekeeping. As a result, the online conversation may reach millions before a single mainstream article appears. In the situation involving Erika Kirk, Candace Owens, and Charlie Kirk, much of the early momentum remained concentrated within digital communities rather than major broadcast networks or national newspapers. This absence became part of the story itself. Commentators asked why larger outlets were not reporting on the claims. Critics argued that responsible journalism requires verification before amplification. Supporters of the online narrative suggested institutional bias. This tension reflects a broader transformation in the media ecosystem. Over the last decade, trust in traditional institutions has declined among certain audience segments. Many people now view independent commentators as alternative investigative voices. At the same time, others see mainstream outlets as essential filters against misinformation. When a controversy touches politically polarizing figures, that trust divide widens even further. The concept of legitimacy becomes central here. Legitimacy in media is not simply about being correct. It is about being recognized as credible. Established organizations build credibility through long-term reputation, transparent sourcing practices, and editorial oversight. Independent creators build credibility through perceived authenticity, direct engagement with audiences, and ideological alignment. Both models have strengths and vulnerabilities. When online allegations surface without documented proof, mainstream outlets may choose to report only on the existence of the controversy rather than on the claims themselves. This approach can appear evasive to audiences who want definitive answers. However, from a legal standpoint, reporting unverified allegations as fact carries serious risk. Defamation laws require careful phrasing and evidence standards. Even repeating a claim can create liability if presented carelessly. Another dynamic at play is selective coverage. Media organizations must prioritize stories based on newsworthiness, available evidence, and public interest. The existence of viral posts alone does not always meet publication thresholds. Yet, when online engagement reaches a certain scale, outlets may feel compelled to address the discourse simply because it has become socially significant. In that moment, the story shifts from "Is the allegation true?" to "Why is this allegation trending?" Public figures navigating such moments face strategic decisions. Issuing a formal statement can shape coverage. providing documentation can influence whether journalists pursue further investigation. Choosing not to comment may limit exposure, but can also fuel speculation. There is no universal formula. Each situation depends on the evidence landscape and the communication strategy of those involved. So another important factor is political polarization. When individuals are strongly associated with particular ideological movements, media framing often reflects broader partisan narratives. Supportive outlets may emphasize the lack of verified evidence. Critical outlets may highlight the seriousness of the allegations while still using cautious language. Audiences frequently interpret coverage through partisan lenses, reinforcing existing beliefs. We must also acknowledge the role of legal counsel behind the scenes. High-profile commentators typically have advisors who evaluate risk before public statements are made. Legal teams may recommend precise wording to avoid escalating a situation. This careful language can appear calculated, but it is often a protective measure in environments where a single phrase can trigger litigation or reputational damage. The Internet, however, does not always reward careful language. Nuanced statements may be overshadowed by bold accusations. A measured denial may receive less engagement than a dramatic claim. As a result, attention tends to gravitate toward extremes rather than balanced analysis. This creates an asymmetry. Caution spreads slowly, while outrage spreads rapidly. In examining the broader pattern, it becomes clear that modern controversies often involve parallel information streams. One stream consists of documented reporting and official statements. The other consists of commentary, reaction, and speculative interpretation. Audiences move between these streams, sometimes blending them together without recognizing the difference in evidentiary standards. For viewers attempting to navigate this environment responsibly, several questions remain useful. Has any primary documentation been released? Are multiple independent sources confirming the same information? Are legal proceedings underway, or are discussions confined to online debate? Distinguishing between investigation and speculation helps prevent premature conclusions. It is also important to resist binary thinking. The absence of immediate mainstream confirmation does not automatically invalidate a claim. Likewise, the existence of viral discussion does not automatically validate it. Responsible judgment requires patience, an increasingly rare commodity in real-time digital culture. As the narrative involving these public figures continues to evolve, the interaction between online communities and institutional media will likely shape public perception more than any single post or clip. Authority in the information age is contested terrain. Trust is fragmented. Audiences must decide which standards they consider credible. In Part 4, we will examine the psychological impact of scandal narratives, how reputations can shift even without formal findings, and why allegations alone, regardless of outcome, can have lasting consequences in the digital archive. One of the most powerful forces in modern media culture is not a court ruling, a verified document, or even a televised interview. It is perception. In controversies involving recognizable names like Erika Kirk, Candace Owens, and Charlie Kirk, perception can shift rapidly, sometimes independent of confirmed evidence. Understanding how reputational dynamics work in the digital era is essential to evaluating any unfolding narrative responsibly. Reputation today is partially constructed in real time. Unlike previous generations, where information moved through slower institutional channels, digital platforms create immediate public feedback loops. Within hours of a claim surfacing, thousands of posts, comments, reaction videos, and analysis threads can redefine how audiences interpret a person's identity. Whether allegations are later substantiated or disproven, the initial wave often leaves a permanent imprint. Psychologists refer to this as the primacy effect. The first version of a story people hear tends to anchor their long-term perception. Even if subsequent corrections emerge, they may not fully displace the initial narrative. In highly emotional cases tied to past criminal scandals, such as the Epstein case, that anchoring effect becomes even stronger. The seriousness of the historical context amplifies emotional response, making it harder for audiences to remain neutral. Another powerful dynamic is reputational contagion. When individuals are mentioned in proximity to controversial topics, audiences may subconsciously associate them with the broader scandal, even if no verified link exists. The mere repetition of a name alongside allegations can create what communication researchers call associative stigma. Over time, search results, algorithmic suggestions, and autocomplete features may reinforce that association. Digital permanence intensifies the effect. In previous decades, a rumor might circulate briefly before fading. Today, screenshots, archived clips, and reposted commentary can remain searchable indefinitely. Even if claims are formally addressed or disproven, the digital footprint persists. New audiences encountering the controversy, months or years later, may see fragments of the original allegation without the full timeline of developments. This permanence creates asymmetric consequences. Allegations require minimal evidence to spread, but disproving them often requires extensive documentation and time. Corrections rarely travel as far or as fast as initial claims. Social media platforms are structurally optimized for novelty and emotional engagement, not for revisiting resolved disputes. It is also important to consider audience segmentation. Not all viewers consume the same information streams. Supporters of a public figure may encounter rebuttals and contextual explanations within their networks. Critics may primarily encounter accusatory content within theirs. Because algorithms often prioritize content aligned with user preferences, different communities can develop entirely different understandings of the same controversy. The psychology of scandal also includes what researchers call moral amplification. When allegations involve serious misconduct themes, especially those connected to exploitation or abuse, audiences react strongly, sometimes before verification is complete. The moral weight of the accusation can override evidentiary caution. People may feel that even discussing the possibility warrants immediate condemnation. At the same time, there is a counter-psychology of skepticism. In politically polarized environments, some audiences assume allegations are strategic attacks designed to discredit influential figures. This reflex can lead to immediate dismissal of claims without examination. Both extremes, instant belief and instant dismissal, reduce space for careful evaluation. Public figures often face a difficult strategic dilemma in such moments. Responding aggressively can escalate the controversy. Responding calmly may be interpreted as weakness. Remaining silent can allow speculation to expand. Addressing every rumor can amplify fringe narratives. Communication experts frequently advise measured, documented responses that avoid emotional escalation. Yet even well-crafted statements can be reframed by critics. Another dimension to consider is platform moderation. Social networks sometimes remove posts deemed defamatory or misleading. However, removal decisions themselves can fuel additional narratives about censorship or suppression. When content disappears, speculation may increase rather than decrease. This feedback loop illustrates the complexity of managing misinformation in open digital ecosystems. We must also examine the role of audience responsibility. While public figures carry visibility and influence, audiences carry agency. Sharing unverified claims contributes to reputational consequences. Choosing to pause, verify, and evaluate before reposting can slow misinformation cycles. Digital literacy has become a civic skill. Importantly, reputational impact does not necessarily indicate factual guilt or innocence. It reflects narrative momentum. History contains examples of both false accusations that caused lasting damage and legitimate investigations that began with public tips. The difference between those outcomes often depends on evidence, due process, and investigative rigor, not on viral intensity alone. In controversies like the one under discussion, the absence of confirmed documentation at a given moment does not automatically settle the question. It simply means conclusions remain premature. Responsible observers must tolerate uncertainty until reliable evidence emerges. That patience can be uncomfortable in a culture conditioned for instant answers. As this narrative continues to circulate across platforms, the reputational dimension will likely remain central. Even if no formal findings materialize, search associations and archive discussions may persist. Understanding this reality underscores why careful language matters. Words spoken or written in moments of speculation can have long-term impact. As the online debate surrounding Erika Kirk, Candace Owens, and Charlie Kirk continues to unfold, it becomes increasingly clear that this controversy is not operating in a vacuum. It is unfolding inside a deeply polarized political and cultural environment. In such an atmosphere, allegations rarely remain isolated factual questions. Instead, they become symbolic flashpoints in broader ideological struggles. Political identity strongly influences how individuals interpret information. Research in political psychology consistently shows that people are more likely to believe claims that align with their existing worldview and more likely to reject claims that challenge it. This cognitive tendency, known as motivated reasoning, affects audiences across the ideological spectrum. When allegations involve figures who are already politically recognizable, interpretations often divide along predictable lines. For supporters of Candace Owens or Charlie Kirk, accusations circulating online may be viewed as coordinated attacks designed to undermine influential conservative voices. Within these communities, discussions often focus on media bias, selective targeting, or alleged double standards. The controversy becomes evidence of perceived institutional hostility rather than evidence of wrongdoing. Conversely, critics who already distrust these figures may interpret the same allegations as confirmation of deeper concerns about influence networks or ideological hypocrisy. In these circles, even unverified claims may feel plausible because they fit pre-existing narratives about power structures and accountability gaps. This dynamic transforms the controversy from a specific factual dispute into what communication scholars describe as narrative warfare. Narrative warfare occurs when competing groups fight not only over facts, but over meaning itself. Each side frames events in ways that reinforce its broader worldview. Facts become secondary to symbolic interpretation. Social media accelerates this process. Platforms algorithmically promote content that generates engagement, and emotionally charged political content generates significant engagement. As a result, posts that frame the situation in dramatic, partisan language often receive more visibility than posts that emphasize uncertainty or nuance. The architecture of digital communication can therefore intensify polarization. Another important factor is tribal reinforcement. Online communities often function as echo chambers, where members validate each other's interpretations. When a claim gains traction inside a tightly connected network, dissenting perspectives may be dismissed quickly. This social reinforcement strengthens group cohesion, but can weaken critical evaluation. In controversies linked to historically explosive topics, like the Epstein case, polarization becomes even sharper. Because the original scandal involved powerful individuals and institutional failures, it left behind widespread distrust. That distrust can be mobilized by various ideological groups to support different narratives. Some may argue that hidden networks remain protected. Others may argue that allegations are weaponized selectively for political gain. It is essential to distinguish between legitimate investigative inquiry and politically motivated amplification. Legitimate inquiry seeks documentation, corroboration, and accountability regardless of ideological affiliation. Politically motivated amplification often emphasizes timing, target selection, and narrative advantage. Determining which dynamic is dominant in a particular case requires examining sources carefully. The media ecosystem further complicates matters. Independent creators may align openly with specific ideological movements. Traditional outlets may be perceived, fairly or unfairly, as aligned with others. As audiences choose sources that match their political preferences, shared factual baselines shrink. Two individuals can consume entirely different streams of information about the same event and arrive at opposing conclusions. Polarization also influences the language used to describe events. Words such as exposed, smeared, leaked, or debunked carry implicit judgments. Even subtle phrasing differences can signal ideological positioning. Over time, audiences learn to decode these signals and gravitate toward language that resonates with their perspective. Another element at play is strategic silence or amplification by influential figures. Political allies may choose to defend publicly, thereby framing the controversy as unjust persecution. Opponents may amplify the allegations, framing them as urgent accountability matters. Each intervention adds fuel to the broader narrative battle. Importantly, polarization does not eliminate the possibility of objective truth. Evidence either exists or it does not. Documentation can be examined, claims can be tested. However, the path to consensus becomes more difficult when audiences interpret new information through entrenched identity filters. For viewers attempting to navigate such controversies responsibly, awareness of polarization is critical. Ask yourself, am I reacting to evidence, or am I reacting to who is involved? Would I apply the same evidentiary standards if the individuals belong to a different ideological camp? Self-reflection can reduce the influence of motivated reasoning. It is also helpful to differentiate between systemic questions and individual allegations. Concerns about institutional transparency or elite networks can be legitimate areas of inquiry. However, attaching those broader concerns to specific individuals requires concrete proof. Conflating systemic suspicion with personal culpability risks unfair conclusions. As this situation continues to evolve, polarization will likely shape its trajectory. Some communities may move on quickly if no documented evidence emerges. Others may continue referencing the allegations as unresolved questions. The controversy's longevity may depend less on factual developments and more on its symbolic value within larger cultural debates. In Part 6, Signed, we will examine the future trajectory of digital controversies, what typically happens next, how investigations either materialize or fade, and what long-term lessons this case offers about media literacy in the information age. As we reach the final analytical phase of this discussion, the most important question becomes, what happens next? In most high-profile online controversies involving recognizable public figures, there are generally three possible trajectories. The first is escalation into formal investigation. The second is gradual fading due to lack of substantiated evidence. The third is transformation into a long-term symbolic reference point within broader cultural debates. If credible, verifiable documentation were to emerge, such as authenticated records, on-the-record testimony, or official investigative confirmation, the story would likely shift from speculative online discourse to structured legal or journalistic examination. At that stage, mainstream media coverage would intensify, legal experts would weigh in, and public statements would become more formal and precise. The narrative would move from internet rumor territory into institutional scrutiny. However, in many digital controversies, that threshold is never crossed. Claims circulate widely, reactions generate engagement, but no independently verified documentation materializes. When this occurs, public attention often shifts elsewhere. Social media ecosystems operate on rapid cycles. New controversies replace older ones. Engagement metrics decline. Without fresh developments, even emotionally charged narratives can lose momentum. There is also a hybrid outcome. Sometimes allegations are neither fully substantiated nor completely disproven. They remain in a kind of unresolved digital archive. Years later, they may resurface during elections, interviews, or renewed public debates. In that sense, the controversy never entirely disappears. It becomes part of the searchable history surrounding the individuals involved. For figures like Candace Owens and Charlie Kirk, who who are already embedded in highly visible political ecosystems, controversies often intersect with broader reputational dynamics. Supporters may frame the episode as another example of media hostility. Critics may frame it as part of a recurring pattern of questionable associations. In polarized environments, narratives rarely produce unanimous consensus. The long-term impact on Erika Kirk, or any individual less publicly established, may depend heavily on search visibility and digital framing. Search engine results, suggested videos, and related keyword associations can shape future perception. This highlights the importance of documentation and clear communication. When allegations arise, preserving accurate records and public statements becomes crucial for historical clarity. Another factor influencing what happens next is platform governance. Social media companies periodically adjust moderation policies regarding misinformation and defamation. If platforms determine that certain claims violate policy, posts may be removed or downranked. However, enforcement decisions themselves can spark debate about censorship or bias. The relationship between content moderation and free expression remains a contested issue in the digital age. It is also worth examining the role of independent investigators and long-form journalists. Occasionally, viral controversies prompt deeper investigative work. Journalists may attempt to trace original claims, verify documents, and interview primary sources. If such investigations occur, they can either validate concerns or definitively debunk them. Until that process unfolds, speculation remains speculation. From a broader perspective, this situation offers a case study in media literacy. Modern audiences must navigate environments where information spreads faster than verification. Emotional reactions are amplified. Context is compressed. Headlines compete for attention. In such conditions, responsible engagement requires deliberate effort. Key lessons emerge. First, viral intensity does not equal evidentiary strength. A claim's popularity does not determine its accuracy. Second, association does not equal proof. Being mentioned in proximity to controversial topics does not automatically establish involvement. Third, timing and political context influence interpretation. Controversies often surface at moments when they carry maximum narrative impact. Another lesson involves patience. In an age conditioned for instant updates, waiting for verified information can feel uncomfortable. Yet patience is often the most reliable defense against misinformation. Institutions, whether journalistic or legal, move more slowly than social media feeds. That slowness can be frustrating, but it exists to ensure accuracy. We must also acknowledge that public trust in institutions remains uneven. Some viewers will continue to rely primarily on independent commentary. Others will wait for traditional investigative confirmation. Bridging that divide may require increased transparency across all media sectors. Clear sourcing, accessible documentation, and consistent standards can strengthen credibility. Ultimately, the controversy surrounding these names reflects larger structural realities of our era. Digital platforms have democratized publishing power. Anyone can broadcast a claim to a global audience. That democratization has exposed genuine wrongdoing in some cases. It has also amplified unverified allegations in others. The responsibility now rests not only with content creators, but with viewers. As this story continues to evolve, or potentially fade, the most responsible stance remains cautious evaluation. Avoid definitive conclusions without documented evidence. Recognize emotional triggers. Question framing. Seek primary sources. Understand the incentives that shape online amplification. In the end, the health of the information ecosystem depends on collective discipline. Public discourse improves when audiences demand verification before outrage, context before condemnation, and documentation before declaration. The next and final segment will provide a closing call to action, along with key reminders and ways you can stay informed responsibly. As this conversation continues to circulate online, Remember that viral headlines are not the same as verified facts. Before you share, react, or form a final judgment about Erika Kirk, Candace Owens, or Charlie Kirk, take a moment to examine sources, review full context, and question framing. The digital age rewards speed, but truth requires patience. If you found this breakdown valuable, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss deeper analysis on media narratives and internet rumors. Comment below with your perspective, but keep the discussion respectful and evidence-based. Follow ongoing updates from credible sources and always separate allegation from confirmation. Stay critical, stay informed, and most importantly, to stay responsible in how you engage online conversations.